A very good afternoon to all our attendees. My name is Charu Seth, and I'm joined by my colleague Utsav Thapliyal. We welcome you to the book writing workshop as part of Fast India's initiative, India Science Book Fellowship. We're honored to have here with us Pranay Lal and Nandita Jayaraj as speakers today. I'm sure you all know these esteemed authors. Now my colleague Utsav will introduce the speakers. Over to you, Utsav.
Thank you, Charu. So welcome everyone. We have two speakers with us over here for the webinar today. The first speaker is Pranay Lal. Pranay Lal is a biochemist who works in the spheres of public health and environment. He published his first book in December 2016 called Indica, which is a deep natural history of the Indian subcontinent. His book won the 2017 Tata Lit Prize, the World Book Fair Award, among others, and was named by Mint Lounge as one of the 50 must-read books about India since independence. The second speaker that we have here today is Nandita Jayaraj. Nandita is a science communicator, journalist, and author, and currently a communications consultant at the Azim Premji University. She co-founded the feminist science multimedia platform, thelifeofscience.com, with Ashima Dogra. They have also published a book called Lab Hopping, which has like dialogues about the triumphs and challenges faced by women in the scientific ecosystem, and it offers a very fresh perspectives on the gender gap that continues to haunt the Indian science today.
Thanks, Utsav. Well, I know the attendees are waiting for the speakers to take the floor. So here I am coming in with a very loaded question for Pranay and Nandita. Pardon me for that in advance. So if you were to divide the entire book writing process or journey into 5 stages, what would they be? Pranay, if you could go first.
So, unlike Nandita, I'm not a trained writer. I have a different vocation. I work in public health and I write on natural history. So for me to write it doesn't come naturally. That's the first thing. So, and also I research on a subject which is now become a passion, but it is alien to my work. So, so you have to devote a lot of energy to find out a lot about what I work on. So I don't think there are 5 clear compartments. I think the driving force for writing a good science book is a question that troubles you. So if you think there's a book, what Toni Morrison, the great American writer, said, that if you think there's a book or a story that has not been told as yet, you need to write about it. It's only you who can write it, right? You can't compel others. And this is the pursuit, that the big mistake I made for about 20 years. I kept telling people who I was engaging with, like paleontologists and geologists or hydrogeographers or, ocean sedimentologists. I would learn such fascinating stuff from them. And I would pursue them and say, listen, why don't you write this book? And they would say, listen, I'm a scientist. I'm not supposed to write. So the first thing that you need to look at is draw the boundaries of what you want to cover. So there are people who write, say, science biographies or those kind of things. I think, again, the canvas needs to be defined. Is it only going to be the personal life of that scientist or the science he did or she did? Or the institution also that grew alongside, or the people he or she was interacting with? What was the milieu or the science policy or the science framework of the time? How did the politics of the time affect them? For example, there are these fantastic books on Fritz Haber. I think there are about 8 or 9 books. Of course, on Einstein, and there might be about 40 or 50. But Haber is a small population, so let's look at him, and an extremely controversial scientist. But if you were to look at Haber's work, there are fantastic biographies written on him. And I think, it's the approach that makes it exciting. I would say 5 of them are not worth reading because the other 3 are so good, because the canvas is so amazing. It makes the reading interesting. So I think the first point, Charu, is that design your boundaries and stay within those boundaries if you can. But, research is such a process that you need to continue engaging and thinking and asking whether you're asking the right questions. Are you able to find the people who can answer those questions for you? That's a very troubling part of science. The second thing I think you need to look at is, what is the format? Natural history, the thing that I do, the most convenient thing is to write it in a chronological order. I think that's the laziest form. And I must say that I've been, my first book in that sense was a lazy book. But, I was also, because I was writing about natural history for the first time and there were no other such books, I was compelled by my peer reviewers to say, listen, you can't take people first a few million years and then up and back and forth between billions and millions of years, because it gets too confusing. So have those metrics in a confine, right? So the boundaries are important. Identify resources and the different camps that exist. And even in science, there are positions that people take, and you have to be very clear on how you want to weigh the different theories and hypotheses and political camps and political agenda and research agendas that exist, and why you choose to adhere with one and over the other. Some of you may end up going to my Goodreads page, and one of my early critics on Goodreads said that Pranay Lal is wrong about something on Deccan volcano, right? And of course, I wrote my book in 2016, but in 2021 I was proven right, because I was talking to scientists who were at the cutting edge at the time. So but I didn't want to retort. So that's the other thing you need to do. Don't be too prickly, because there will be people after a certain time coming to get back to you saying that, hey, how do you know about this? So first thing, define your boundaries. Two, be very clear what you want to keep in your book and what not to keep in your book. Keep copious endnotes so that you are able to tell your reader that, listen, I did look into this angle, but I decided not to go ahead with this because I don't think it merits further discussion for these reasons, right? Second point. Third point, develop your own style to write. And that is a very difficult thing, because while you do research, you end up getting sucked into trying to write like certain people. You have heroes who you've been reading for a long time, and you end up developing their voice and their kind of syntax, their grammar. Be very careful. I would urge you to find your own voice. That is a difficult thing, because we want to hear you write in your voice. I don't want to hear Carl Sagan or Isaac Asimov or David Attenborough, talking. Otherwise it looks pretty jarring. You're talking about a different milieu and in a different voice. It doesn't work. My fourth point would be that, divide your time carefully. There are certain sections in the book that you will love, and you say, listen, I know this very well. The research I've done is fantastic. And, I'm going to tell that author that, listen, I know this better than you, and you will try to do that one-upmanship. Try not doing that. A lot of very senior authors do it, and they succeed, because when you do critical review and critical analysis, 20, 30 years after the book has got published, it looks good in a PhD thesis. But, for the lay reader, for a common person, it is important that you do not show that one-upmanship, right? So that's my fourth point. The fifth point I would say is, try not being too esoteric. Don't try showing off, even within, say, if you're writing at, particle physics, and you've already come up with a niche audience. Even as you write for a very specific audience, there should be some pages, or at least the first, 10 or 20% of that book should appeal to just about everybody. A historian, a geographer, a sociologist, a cephalogist, somebody who doesn't know particle physics, is away from physics, in fact, should still say that, listen, I've got this book in my hand, and I've got a flight, he finds the book, or she finds the book in a flight, and say, hey, let me read this, and should hold the attention for some time. I think that's what every science book should have. I think that's what great scientists or great science writers do. That would be my 5 areas. And one last point, a sixth corollary, if you may permit me, is that spend 90% or 95% of your time researching and thinking about it. And like what good humanities people do, use counterfactual, use different sciences to tell that same story. For example, in my case, it's very simple, because there can be a fossil, a rock, water, soil, historical monument, local myth or culture that explains the same story, right? In a different version. Maybe in particle physics, you just have to depend on certain scientists or a few particles to tell you that story. But try bringing in elements that may be more diverse and keep everybody else, every kind of reader interested in your story. So thanks, Charu. I hope I've answered your question.
Thank you, Pranay. That is actually very helpful. You basically covered all our themes that we were supposed to, cover during this webinar. And that's great. That's a great hook for the rest of the themes that we are going to, ask questions about. Now, Nandita, we would love to, ask the same question to you, but we want the answer from your experience, the stages of writing, stages of book writing, the outline, research, style of writing, as was, talked about by Pranay. So over to you, Nandita.
Thanks, Charu. So, I mean, just a quick disclaimer to everyone that apart from children's books, I'm only one general audience book old. I'm glad, Charu, you want me to speak from my perspective because I really cannot generalize or prescribe anything for all of you. But what I would like to say is that in our case, Ashima and I wrote this book. By the time we started thinking about writing this book, we already had at least 2-3 years of research into the topic under our bag, and then was when we got some interest from a publisher, saying that maybe this could even be translated into a book. So when we started, I mean, we took more than 4 years to finish writing our book, and I think partly that's because we didn't really give this a lot of thought. The process, the methodology of writing a book. I think that way a lot of today's authors or your prospective shortlistees are fortunate because at least there is somebody who is sort of giving you ideas about how this journey is going to be like. So even though we didn't really follow a strict methodology, there are definitely learnings that we've had in retrospect. So what are they sharing now with you is more drawing upon what worked for us, what didn't work for us, and how I would go about writing a book if I did another one. So it did for sure. Our first step, what really set off the book writing journey for us was a concept note. So a concept note, we saw it sort of like an outline of what the book would be about, but very much for ourselves, for us to, and also in our case, there was 2 authors. I don't know if there might be co-authors among some of you all here, but if there is, then this becomes, that much times more important because you really want to get on the same page with your co-author. But even otherwise, even with yourself, you may know that you want to write a book and you want to write about this, but to put it down and to actually have like a, maybe a 300-word outline about what to put it down in paper really will make the whole coming year or 2 or how many ever a lot smoother for you. So this is something that we did, and we also sort of we also did have like a chapter outline, but if we knew this is probably going to evolve, and it did evolve over the process, but it helped us to at least have something to to sort of like an axis, so that we're not just so exploratory. The temptation, I think, as scientists and journalists is just to be as thorough as possible. So it helps to have that something, that sort of skeleton to anchor on. So the second step, I think, is the first part of the research process. Like I said, in my case, the research started even pre the inception of the idea of writing a book. But there was, I did, looking back now, I realized that our pre-book research was very exploratory, and it was really important to us because it really helped us identify what we wanted to write on and why this book needs to be written at all. So the exploratory research part is very much sort of scoping in our case, the gender gap in science. So really going to as many places as we could, talking to as many people who represented various different kinds of life experiences and social backgrounds as possible. And again, here, when you're doing this, using that preliminary chapter list you have sort of helps to decide who you want to talk to and where. And then when we sort of had this exploratory research, like the foundational research, um, uh, so like as a foundation when it was set up. That's when I don't know where Ashima, who advised Ashima on this, but I do remember that she was the one who urged us, who said, we need to identify a subtext for the book. This is when I heard about it. I mean, it was really a foreign word to me, and I really had difficulty understanding, why we are doing this. Even why do we need to do this exercise? And it was unexpectedly really challenging. But basically, I mean, when we're writing journalistic pieces about science, you don't really need to have a takeaway message or anything like that from your articles that you are writing. But when you're writing a book, there's it's a different thing. There's some sort of finality to it. You want a person who's finished the book to be able to articulate some new perspective that they have gained from it, not just a page after page of information. So, since the book was based on work we had already been doing, we felt it was important to, Ashima felt it was important um, to discern, to write down, and just to sort of keep in mind a subtext for the book. And what do I mean by this? I think a very simplistic way to look at it is to find an answer to this question of, if there's one sentence that could summarize what you want your reader to take away from this book, what would it be? And like I said, it was really painful for us to come up with this sentence. But eventually it turned out to be such a lifesaver, because it really helped us as co-authors to keep us anchored to something fixed. Even as we were getting, stories were piling up, sub-stories, angles, the issues were getting more and more complex and convoluted. But to have this one subtext that we knew this thing is probably not going to change, and to decide what makes it to the book and what doesn't make it to the book, and how much we need to dig further, what we need to dive deeper into. The subtext really, really helped us, I think, over the years of our work. And then comes the second part of the research, which for now I'm just calling it more focused research, where we have sort of a tentative chapter list, we have a subtext, and now we can also, by now we've listened to all the interviews we've already done. We know who has something more to say, a different perspective to offer. We know that there are some gaps that we may need to talk to other people to fill up those gaps. So the more sort of in-depth and focused research that is not so exploratory, but little more very much about how do we finish the research for this book. And then 5 is, of course, writing. And I think for many of us, and maybe some of you will relate, the challenge is to put an end to the research, to make peace with the fact that we're never going to know everything about the topic. And I think this is an important conflict to have in you, because I think it's probably more dangerous to feel like you know everything and then just write. It's better to have a book that takes 10 years but is more thorough than a book that just takes 1 year but is not the best job you could have done. But at the same time, even the book that took 10 years is not going to be 100%, the truth of whatever it is. So you really have to sort of face this conflict of, okay, this is enough. I have to put an end to this research and I have to put my pen to paper. And when another thing just quickly to add is that when I finally managed to start writing a chapter, I found that I worked best when I had no option to research while I was writing. So sometimes just be too irresistible to open a new tab and to look something up, and then before you know it, you've been on the same paragraph for like weeks. So I mean, and then I think that's what writer's block is also. You just can't actually write. So I mean, at those points, I would ask myself, is this a sign that I'm not ready for this chapter? Is this a sign that I need to do more work on this chapter and come back, which is also totally fine? Or sometimes when I ask this question, I realize that no, I am prepared to write this chapter, in which case you just need to be super strict and like turn off your internet, or in extreme cases, take an actual paper and a pen and, start writing. So that really helped. I just want to quickly add that if there were 6 steps, I would add editing to it, because I mean, editing your first draft is as important really as writing. By editing, I mean editing it yourself, editing it between co-authors, a lay person reading it and giving you feedback, and of course, an expert editing it. All of these in very different but super important ways. It does improve your book from, the first draft to the final draft is often like a transformation. I'll end there.
Thank you, Nandita. That's tremendous. So, I mean, I just realized that there's a lot of groundwork that goes into, writing a book, including extensive research, as you and Pranay both mentioned. So thank you. My next question is to Pranay. So what are the different ways of conducting that research? If you could just shed more light on that aspect.
I think everybody has their own way of doing research, and I'm hugely unorganized. And I don't have a method, but I like something that actually I'll borrow 2 ideas from films. There's a film called Gone in 60 Seconds. It's a terrible film. Nicolas Cage, don't watch it. But there's one line in it which says, which is very good about it. I mean, it's not a line. What he does is he robs cars, and what he's got like 1 minute to go, and and he has to open 3 locks. And he still thinks the 55th second of how he's going to approach the problem. So that's what research is all about. That you have to think it through, and you have to decide that point where you have to say, listen, now it's done. You can't go any further. And I think objectively you've achieved Pareto optimality. That means you've read 85% of all the literature that was available. You can now rank it, whether you want to say that, listen, I've read the highest ranked papers in this, or I've looked at the major people who matter, and I've looked at their work and their thesis on what the positions are, or I've looked at 85% of the best papers, 85% of the gray literature, 85% of criticism. You can divide it based on several silos, right? But the fact of the matter is that how are you pursuing that question? I mean, do you have an answer that is convincing enough? And I'm going to, differ a little with Nandita here, that, that I took 22 years to write my first book, and a huge amount of uncertainty whether I should write it, am I the right guy? Those kind of things, of course. I wrote my second book was based out of a podcast, and we shot that podcast, or we rather recorded that podcast over the COVID period. And both my interlocutor and I were having a glass of wine. We sent each other a bottle of wine, and we said, let's talk. And we were given the challenge that, can you predict what's going to happen to COVID? And this was in January end of February of 2021, right? And we were having a lark. And what we decided to say is, listen, we know nothing about COVID. Even the sequencing had just started to happen. The first sequences were coming. So we didn't know anything about it. And we said, listen, let's turn this argument around and say, there's such benefits that viruses bring. Can we talk about those? And, I could see that, our 3, organizers of the Jaipur Lit Fest, Sanjoy Roy and Namita Gokhale and William Dalrymple, they actually jumped off their seats and said, are you mad? You're going to talk about benefits of viruses? Here we are reeling under a pressure of a pandemic, and people are dying in China. It's now crossed over in Korea and wherever. People are dying on the streets in Spain and Iran. And you're going to talk about benefits? And I said, yes, that's what it's going to be. And so that's how my next book came into and it was, like I said, out of a podcast. And, that book is also the one in which I have got the least amount of criticism for making mistakes, although it's highly technical, because I'm talking about viruses and genes and genomes and all those kind of things. But, I had fun doing that book, even in that 1 year. And I was working full time at that time. I was in charge of a COVID hospital. But even then, I stole time, and I did, and let me just say this. In that book, when I'm praising the virus, I got such interesting stuff. That's because you constantly think. For example, I was touching upon hantaviruses. Now, hantaviruses, if you were to do a Google search, you will find nothing on it. There's some WHO pages, and you'll find some pages idhar udhar, what it's all about. But I discovered that Mozart died of a hantavirus. Now, Mozart died 3 centuries ago, right? And the world hadn't seen Mozart's death certificate. So I wrote to the St. Stephen's Cathedral in Vienna and said, would you be able to pull out Mozart's death certificate? And they obliged, right? Now, for the first time, we got it published. So, that's the joy of it. That's the joy of research, that you bring in such, your kida in your dimag, should not stop. It has to, I think Ghalib said the right thing. Kurete ho, wo baat justuju kya hai? And the fact that that kida is going inside your head, it's actually pushing you to think so much that you want to give your reader the sublime, the bliss that you are experiencing, the high that you're experiencing doing that research, and you want to tell it in a story, right? So both my books are available on LibGen. Please download them if you can't afford them. But I want you to read. I want you to stay curious. That's the idea of writing this book. And therefore, sometimes you don't end up writing the proposal first, or the chapters, or the sectionization of that. The proposal that you send is only for the publisher to know that this is what the broad framework is. But as you write, your frameworks, your chapters change. They just go awry, and you say, listen, I'm going to chunk this and make it smaller, build it in this chapter, and make this bigger because I think this story is coming out much more beautifully. So I think it's like a canvas. You tear a canvas, and then you say, listen, this is what I'm going to draw here. And as you started to put layers of paint, you discover that there is something more that's emerging. And these shades and these colors and these strokes, in this light is going to look differently. I think that's the beauty of it. It's how do you get your research to talk in a way and bring light to the subject that nobody's thought of, and yet remain critical. And I think Nandita is spot on to say that, there's only that much you will know, and that beyond a certain period, you may be going into a turf which is highly uncertain. I think we must recognize it. How do we put it out? How do we be humble and conscientious of the fact that we may be wrong beyond the point? I think that's the art of writing well in science, and that you assume that the future is going to reveal those answers to you. But I think that's the important. So I'll stop here. I don't know if Charu, if I've even answered your question, but I just thought I'll give a perspective on this.
No, but that was very wonderfully captured. Thank you. Thank you so much. If I could take a related question around research from one of the attendees, Nandita and Pranay, please feel free to jump in with your perspectives on this. How do you assimilate changes that happen on a shorter time scale during the larger timeline of writing the book, particularly when you come from a science journalism mindset where the smallest changes in your field catch the attention and make for a new narrative? It's a question by Vanshika Singh.
Should I answer?
Please go ahead.
So it depends. Of course, some themes, some book topics will be more susceptible and to this, but it is important because for journalists, especially, they are writing for a day-to-day audience. So you want to be relevant to today, and a news article today, except for like archival purposes, is not really useful to read 10 years from now. But that is where a book really is different. So in both we had to be really careful while writing it, and in a very superficial way, just the tenses, the grammar. We had to and we had to be write in a way that would make the book as timeless as possible. But it also again made us question why are we writing this as a book? We've been publishing this as articles online. It's been doing pretty well. So what is the need to write this as a book? Just we didn't, just want to be grabbing this opportunity because it came to us, but we wanted to write in a way that and like I think all of us who are writing books, there has to be a good reason for writing a book, not just to become an author. So we have to, even if the events that you're talking about, the developments that are happening week to week, month to month, uh, even then there has to be a timelessness to what you're writing. At least, like I'm writing about gender gap in a book published in 2023, and there have been so many changes even in the past 5 years. We're talking about policies, talking about issues that exist, so many changes. So draw that balance between wanting your book to be as current as possible, but also wanting the book to be equally relevant in 2033, and maybe not relevant in the same way, but even in 2033 it would be relevant in a aspect of how far have we come, how were things there back then. So just like quickly reading Vanshika's question again, I would say forget about the smallest changes, but be conscious of them. And there are some, I think, ways your editor also can help you with writing, so that you don't have to, don't concentrate on the smallest change. Really, we have to get out of journalism mindset, and if things are and like resist the temptation to comment on the smallest nuance, the smallest thing that will quickly become timed, which will quickly get out of date. So we need to reorganize our priorities such that the timeless aspects of it stand out, and the amount of superficial details are minimized.
Great.
Thanks a lot, Nandita, for answering this question. Again, one more question to you now that I'm going to pose. So, okay, we've talked about like the groundwork that basically goes into writing for now. So I just want to shift gears and take the conversation towards building curiosity amongst the readers, right? So, Nandita, could you shed light on how to capture the interest of a reader? And what all things do you keep in mind while you're writing a book on this aspect particularly?
I think there is a fine line between, how to clickbait without becoming clickbaity. Like we do want people to read us, but I think the problem happens when we start giving too much onus on numbers, which are in many ways faulty and not really reflecting of whether a book is doing well or not. So my book might have sold 200 copies, or it might have sold 200,000 copies. But if 200 people are engaging with it, whereas only 100 out of the 100,000 people are actually engaging with it, then we have to talk about which book is successful or not. So, for sure, when you say first capture the interest, there are things like the cover and how it's presented and all of that, which unfortunately does play a huge role in whether we look twice at a book in a bookshop. But now I think with more of us shopping online, reading online, things that have changed a little more. I guess we're reading blurbs more, and so I do think that for somebody writing for a general audience, my go-to tools are to constantly keep thinking about how is this, whatever I'm writing about, whether it's the gender gap or whether it is particle physics. I try and stay connected to the real world, to real people, to current affairs. No matter what the topic is, I try to sort of not to be aware of anything that is linking this topic to the real world, and it's not really as hard as you think to do, even with something super fundamental, a very specific sort of science. There are always ways to sort of make it to make people feel like this is why I should care about it. And I also find it useful to keep myself in check by asking if so many people have written about this, have already, whether as a book or an article or whatever it is. So many people have said this already. Why am I saying it too? What am I going to do differently that makes my writing a worthy addition to this huge body of information that really already exists? Especially with writing journalistic stuff, there's a big paper that comes out and every publication is writing about it. Then why, when there is a international science news platform writing about it, why would somebody want to read someone that in an Indian small magazine is writing? So this value addition is something that we need to think about, even for a book. Like I said, why am I? So this question of why are you writing this book really sort of kept us motivated and challenged. I think some of the ways are, of course, by linking it to current affairs, and then often, we rely on the human interest aspect that faces behind the research, and sort of, because research is a human pursuit after all, so it's very much affected by the people who are doing it, the conditions in which they're working. So those are all the things that I'm personally interested in, and I find are useful tools to communicate research. That said, people tend to sometimes over-rely on it. We're talking about a new discovery, but you see the whole article is only about like the personal life of a scientist or something. And that I feel is kind of a cheat. So it needs to complement the psychom part of it rather than just, run away with just their personal narrative. So that's just stuff that came to mind.
Thanks. That's like beautifully answered, Nandita. Charu, over to you.
So I was just going to ask Pranay if you wanted to add something to this, but capturing the interest and retaining the interest from personal experiences, and anecdotes are welcomed.
No, I think Nandita has done a stellar job. I don't have much to add on it. I think let's move on. I think that's good.
Okay, great. Okay, so we're basically moving forward with the aspect of appeal. So what are the visual elements that can be included in the book to make it more attractive to the audience and better engaging? Pranay, if you could answer that.
So let me just say this, that, let your content drive the visual content, right? I tell my stories, in two ways. One, most Indians don't read anymore, right? Most people buy books, they just stack up. It looks good because my books are pretty beautiful, so they want to buy it anyway. So it's a nice book to buy, but I want them, whether they are going in a cab or in their cars being driven, even if they're doing toilet reading, I just want them to look at the visuals and understand the story. So if you pick up a chapter, say on the Jurassic, where do you see the Jurassic rocks of India? And they should say, Arey, it is next to Bhuj, I go there every time, or I'm next to Baroda, it's there, that kind of stuff. Right? So there's an association, suddenly there's some understanding that, we have Jurassic rocks in India, we've got Jurassic dinosaurs in India, that kind of stuff. So that person who's picked up the 699 book is making at least some use. Right? That's the first part. The second thing is, so your editorial content should complement and supplement your images, your graphs, your pictures, your maps, right? And try this, there are two levels of, actually there are three levels of design that you have to be conscious about. I think we are, the book cover is very important, but I think we should discuss this at length, because I can get a designer as well. But here's my point. I'm very finicky about design, because I imagine a book both for a person who is not going to read it and generally doesn't have the time, right? But I still want him to or her to know a story, which I think is important, right? The second thing is try putting in not just photographs, but in my case, I put a lot of maps. I put in a lot of images of, say, textile and things that you imagine. I mean, why should textile be there in a virus book, right? So people say, why do you want it, right? So I've got carpets from Turkey, which has a story with or still life paintings from Dutch masters. Now there is a virus story there, right? And like I said, a Mozart death certificate. Till my book was not published, most people did not know Mozart died because of a viral disease. Everybody thought that he died of drinking over consumption of alcohol, and that's the popular myth. If you look at the Oscar-winning film Amadeus, it's actually it's wrong, right? Now the thing is, science has to illuminate, and it has to illuminate not only by fact but also with very crisp writing. And if you have the backing of your publisher to give you that opportunity of using good images and color publishing, then it is brilliant. So I was I waited 22 years not only to write my book but also finding the ideal publisher, because nobody wanted to take a chance with a new writer who's an outsider like me, to write on geology, paleontology, the natural history of India, and get a full color book. So the first time Penguin published a book which was full color was my book. It was a huge risk. And the margins that the publisher was making was very limited. Because if you got a full color hardbound book and it's priced at $6.99, you're spending about more than half of it only on publishing, plus on distribution, plus whatever other expenses that they have, right? So the margins were too little for the publisher. And I'm not defending the publisher here at all. Please don't get me wrong. What I'm trying to say here is that you have to negotiate at every step as a writer. And you say that, listen, it's my pet project. I believe in this. It's my lifetime's work. I don't want to come up with a bad product. I don't want to be ashamed 5 years later or 10 years later in front of my children that, or your peers or your whoever, or your classmates, and they say, come on, yeah, you wrote a pretty article. So, you have to actually be standing out there and saying that, the work that you've put is one controversial in the sense people are talking about. Controversial does not mean that it has raised heckles, right? It actually means people are talking about. Whether they agree or they don't agree, that's another, right? And even in science, that's the case. I mean, read books by, say, John Brockman. They're fantastic. They're polarized. They polarize people left, right, and center. But it's based on hard science. So I think the purpose of science writing is, science by itself is, by the very etymology of the word science, is to illuminate. And if you are writing also is illuminate. I mean, for example, in the word, if you look at the literary meanings of the word write, and let's start by Urdu. The word for Urdu writing is roshnai. That means ink. Roshan is also lighting, right? Roshan hona is to illuminate, right? Now, if you were to look at even if you look at Sanskrit, for example, that's the word. So both science and writing illuminate the minds of society and people individually. And I think if you're not doing that, I think you have a weak book. I mean, you might have a book, it will sell, you might make lakhs of rupees or whatever. But, is it durable? I don't know. For example, Shakespeare was not the best-selling author of his time. In fact, he almost died of penury. But, he was the most durable because every poor person in England was watching his or her his plays, right? And that's what made him durable, right? So I'll end here. I'm just ranting on this.
Now that was an informational rant. Thank you, Pranay. You talked about design, you talked about packaging, and then you delved into science writing. So thank you. Here, before moving on to the next theme and the question to the speakers, let's take a question from the audience. So Satyavrata Samavedi has asked, what is the best strategy to balance depth and breadth? And in the spirit of catering to a broad audience, how do authors decide what level to pitch the theme or topic at? So again, it's about appeal to a broad audience. If Nandita, would you like to answer that?
I think, I mean, sometimes there's this pressure that we have to write a book that everyone will want to read or everybody will like. And that's just too much pressure to put on ourselves. So our best bet is being, self-aware enough to understand, to have, first of all, before you go on writing a book, most of us have written enough, have some experience writing. So draw on that and try and identify which audiences you are the best at, your kind of communication is most effective with. So I think I feel that it's probably smart to decide on something that you're good at and you're comfortable with and you enjoy. So that that the second part of the question was, I think, how do you decide which or how much audience you want to extend to? And the first one about the depth versus the breadth, there's no way really to answer this except to sort of trust your instincts and if you have people, if you have like collaborators, if you have people that you trust who can give you feedback on this, they can back you up. But you have to be in a place where you trust yourself enough to decide that, okay, this much depth is enough. Now I can progress to the next aspect or whatever it is. But I mean, I'm tempted to say depth is, I don't know if it's safe to say depth is more important than breadth. Depth is no doubt important, but again, just to reiterate, some of us have the tendency to dig and dig and dig and then get deeper and deeper. Sometimes the message gets lost in translation. So always, as long as we stay connected, that I've not gone deep enough that that the reader is lost. You have to make sure that the readability, if you're writing a book, you want it to be read. So the readability really has to be what is guiding you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for answering that. I would hop back to the visual aspect theme. And if Pranay would like to answer this question for me. So regarding the packaging itself, so what are the tips and tricks, or are there any rules of thumb for the front and back cover of the book? It's like very specific question from my side.
Depends on the topic, yeah, and depends on the format of your book. If it is a hardbound, then you have, also, I mean, like it's like the subject and what are the kind of visual elements you want to play with. Designers are very conscientious that they want to follow the styles. For example, most designers would say, "Aajkal ye chal raha hai," that kind of a thing. I mean, thankfully, my designers have not been, kind of constrained and boxed. So both the books actually got design awards. So I don't think. So try breaking the mold. Come up with your own design. Think. Be brave. Be bold. A book is a work of art. It is not something that you should think that it should look like a textbook. Don't make it boring. Like in the internet age, you have to have, you just have a moment when people are running past an airport terminal, your book should catch the eye. I think that's an important element. But I think it should also not just have, I mean, my book could be about viruses and I put, Deepika Padukone on it. I mean, that's not fair. The sense is true. So what I'm trying to say is that it has to be relevant. But when I was doing the book on viruses, we were conscious we didn't want to put an outline of a virus because people were tired. See, but we wanted to show the majesty of the virus. The book is titled Invisible Empire. we didn't want to show forts and fortresses. I mean, that makes no sense. That's what we imagine an empire to be. But we wanted to show how viruses actually, impacted different life forms. So once you pick up the book and it looks like a good book for animals or something, right? So most people picked it up and thought that, there's a nice picture of a moa and a parakeet and a starfish, and it looks extremely resplendent when you see it. But once you turn it around and see that, it's actually how viruses gave you color. If the action of a virus doesn't happen, it doesn't give you color, for example, right? Or why, grapes became edible is because of viruses. Or, so there are 15 stories on that. So once they pick that up and say, that's how the book sold. So the idea is that, sometimes you don't show the obvious, and you show it in nuances and in indirect ways. For in a virus book, I did not want to show a virus, right? So, but make it visually appealing. And, there's immense talent in this country in terms of how people design and come up with ideas. Don't hold yourself back. This is your life's work. I think unless there is somebody who's published, I know Dinesh Sharma Sahab he's my guru. I mean, he's perhaps here on this chat, or sorry, on this call. But others who are venturing for the first time, think about it as something that this is your life's work, and don't compromise on editorial. If you're, I mean, that's one thing. Sorry, Nandita, you said about editing being it was a very important point you brought. But sometimes what happens is editors, because they work in a certain way, they tend to change the way you've written and make it sound like what is good grammar, right? I don't think that's how it should be. You have your voice and you want to write wrong English, but it's communicating something which is it's fundamentally correct, right? For example, if Victor Hugo were to publish now, his sentences would be torn apart, because his sentences were 3 pages, 5 pages long, single sentence, no comma, no colon, no full stop, nothing, just single sentences going on. But they were beautiful, right? Faulkner had this problem. Conrad, what a great writer, what a master, right? So when you read these people, half these people may not pass the editorial strictness that most people follow today. I would say still hold on to your voice. You have the negotiation. Do not fall for that thing that nahi ye acha nahi hai. And I think there's another comment somebody said about how do I look at endnotes or something. Right? Some question on that, but I'll leave it to you, Charu, to curate this call.
Oh, thanks. Thank you, Pranay. Well, moving on. Again, regarding once you've completed your book, how do you go about promoting it? So what are your ways of promoting the book? Nandita, if you could take this.
This is very fresh in my mind because it's happening right now for us. Well, our book is, it's not really, the kind of book that just flies off the shelves, both I think for the topic that we're tackling, and also visually it's definitely nowhere as close to how beautiful Pranay's book is, which I guess is something that could have been different, but it just, I mean, that's just the way it is right now. As much as I love my cover, it is it doesn't, scream out at you from the bookshelf. So we really need to. We wrote a children's book before this with Puffin about women scientists again, and we got lots of really good feedback from people who read it. But we learned the lesson then that we didn't do much promotion for it because we were very new and we thought if a book is good, then it will just sell. But it didn't. So this time, and also because we put so much more work into this and we had a lot of faith in this book, we made up our minds that we would, make an effort to promote the book. And we also realized that publishers, they try to enable you, but really you have to take the lead in doing this yourself. Nobody's, at least for first time, authors like us, nobody's sending us on book tours, or nobody's even like paying for me to, I mean, anything. Basically, you do everything yourself. We write to bookshops, we write to other people asking if they would be part of a panel, and write to institutions selling, and of course the publishers help us by linking to distributors and making the books available. But it's a lot of work. It's really kind of taking over my life a little bit now. I thought book writing was the tough part, but because this book is so, it's close to our hearts and we want to give it the best chance it can. And I'm 3 months on and thinking that maybe it's never going to become a bestseller, but still, it's the time is still young, and while the interest is there, I'm finding a lot of value in having face-to-face events. So, I mean, I tend to travel generally a bit, at least every month, to a couple of cities. So we've been very active, and the nice part is a lot of independent bookstores are also, equally interested in authors engaging with local audiences as much as the authors are. So the advantage of doing face-to-face events for us is that it's enabling us to get out of the social media bubble. We have this social media bubble very supportive of us, long-time supporters, and most of them, I think, have got the book. But a book like this only, means something if we get out of this, bubble, if we stop talking to the echo chamber. So the events are where, at least, many people who are within this social media bubble also end up. But even if there are 3 or 4 people who just walked into the bookstore, or who are just part of that neighborhood and see something interesting, especially in the smaller cities, I realize people are a lot more interested because there aren't a lot of options for them. I was recently in Bhubaneswar, and the level of, I think very few people in the audience had heard of me or the book before. But the engagement was so good, and people were, and even in terms of sales of the book, we sold a lot more copies than I've done in events in other big cities like Bangalore. So social media, of course, is, we're all doing that anyway. But I personally think there's a lot to be gained by doing a lot of face-to-face stuff. And also I find out that there are a lot of other authors, other scientists, people in the community who are actually quite supportive and are willing to give you a leg up, or to post an endorsement or feedback of the book, and that kind of stuff really helps also. So that's something that I think you can tap into your network for.
Thanks, Nandita, for that brilliant answer. There's one more thing. Pallab Roy Gupta over here, they have asked a question which I would like to direct it to you, Nandita, because they're talking about, the question is how to overcome the challenges of communication gap during the research bit, which is, suppose he said someone is not getting the chance to talk to the researchers whose interview could be crucial for the story, right? In your book, you have dialogues with different people across India, let's say. But let's say there were some people whom you couldn't interview, then how would you challenge that, overcome that challenge?
Yeah. Right. Well, very rarely it's a situation where there's only one person who can possibly, give you a particular perspective, or give you some information. If it is, like if I want to write a story on one person's, fantastic experience, and that person is not willing to speak with me, then I think, sometimes you may have to come up with the tough answer of, okay, if I'm so reliant on this one expert or these 3 experts, and none of them are agreeing to speak to me for whatever reason, I would say try, knock on all doors, unless they've said, of course, if they said no to your face, then you have to respect that. But if it's a matter of not being able to reach them, then don't only look at trying to reach out online, try to find out their colleagues, try to find out where they live. Sometimes all you have is a postal address. It's worth, sending a snail mail. If it's a story you so much believe in, it's totally worth knocking on all doors. But despite all that, if it doesn't work out, then of course we need to reevaluate. Is this still a story worth telling? Could I in any way, could this be an important story without these perspectives? But in most cases, I think, if your book is about one particular topic, say, I don't know, like lantana, or whatever it is, don't just go to the usual names, the big names, because the big names are often the people who get way too many invites, the people who, are probably slower to reply to emails because they have so many requests. But there are so many scientists in India and so many experts in any given field that go outside that well-known bubble and try to speak. It's also a great idea to sort of, not to make the public also aware about people that we don't know about. So try to find out other ways of getting the information you need.
Hey, thanks a lot. Thanks a lot, Nandita, for that answer. Okay, I'm going to take up a last question. I'm going to combine two questions over here. Pranay, if you could answer this. So Upasana Saraju has asked that how much chapter level detail should a book proposal present, especially when research is still underway and the chapter wise narrative hasn't fully emerged yet. And then Avik Banerjee has asked that how do you solve the exclusion dilemma, right? Like how do you decide what goes into the book and what doesn't? So I'm just like clubbing these two questions. And
I think they're connected, aren't they? And I think they're both very good questions. It's a dilemma that every author, I mean, I can tell you, we've spoken, about this at length. So, in fact, our books become voluminous because of that. And there's a personal anecdote that you discovered and you don't want to leave it up, right? I mean, so that's a very critical thing. You need to see how good your story is progressing, right? So sometimes it's like, it's like screenplay writing, and eventually it's going to get translated into film. It's like that. So imagine it like that. So if you throw in an item number there, would it, not work? Or is it, or if you take a side story of a character that is not going to make too much, would not add to the richness of the story, do you want to do that? So that's a thing that you'll have to weigh in your mind. And, as you read and, read again, you'll realize that, this is looking too heavy and you will start chopping it down. So what you need to do is get your, get all your material in one place, try filling your canvas with, with the rough sketches outside before you, and as you start painting, you continue to work on that material over and over again till you find that, this is, with all the material that you had, this is the leanest thing that you can make, right? And this is what is best. Because see, unlike fiction, which can be very, very flaccid, science writing is by and large very lean. You have to keep it focused on what you're trying to convey to your reader. They might be exciting personal stories of the scientists on how they ended up discovering, whether it's accident, diligence, or whatever. Again, it depends on the genre within science communication that you're writing. I mean, is it a biography? Is it natural history? So in case of my books, I was writing the natural history, which is like mini biographies of landscapes or creatures within them, right? So you had to come up with a perspective from whose perspective are you telling the story now, right? And so most of the cases, the voice is very important. Are you speaking yourself? Are you looking at that object and speaking? Are you going there as an interviewer? Are you the interlocutor? Or are you quoting a paper and doing third person, putting like, if you read Salman Rushdie's Joseph Anton, it's written in the third person, although it's his own story, right? And he's changed all the names, but it is exactly his family story. So it's up to you how you position it, right? That's the idea. So I don't know, Nandita, maybe you have wiser words than what I have just said.
Not really. I pretty much resonate with most of what you said.
All right. Thank you. Thank you so much, Pranay and Nandita. Before we close, I would just like to take this last question. And I'm being a little bit selfish here because I've written my thesis and I know it's a pain to include references. And someone has asked the same question. How do you accommodate the ever annoying yet mandatory references in a popular science book without hindering the process of reading? This is by Avinandan Mukherjee. So, Nandita, if you could answer this question.
Yeah, I mean, I really did not, want to include like footnotes in the book because I don't know. It's just a personal preference. I have seen some really good books also with footnotes, but to me, we try to, we try to include a little bit about the reference enough that that people could look it up, and we of course linked it and cited them in the end as a reference section. So there would only be there would be the numbers. I'm sorry, I'm not getting the terminology, but the superscript numbers that link to the references at the end. But what I really wanted to do, but we didn't end up doing it, was have a more friendly looking reference section, or bibliography, or whatever you call it, where we don't just like list this sort of codified looking list of URLs, and now everything is also URLs, so that really like it's quite ugly to look at. But to accompany each of the links and the citations with the link to the chapter, like to have it as a breakup with chapters, and to have like a 1-line, 2-line description of what this link was, kind of like a caption for a photograph, so that so that people really know what this link is about. And I don't know, I think there's maybe better ways to do it, because I'm like, I don't know how useful it is to include URLs in a print book. And very often when you're citing from newspaper reports and things like that, that's how the publishers also ended up doing it. So yeah, I mean, I think it's clear that I don't have a clear answer to this question, but think about readability, especially if you've only been writing for scientists and science students. We are a lot more tolerant with like intimidating looking footnotes and reference sections. But if you're writing for a public audience, really think about readability, and don't get too obsessed with referencing everything. Really be selective on what you want. If I'm writing that I think there are some. You don't need to give like hyperlinks to extra information for everything. So I think we only cited when we have mentioned when we had to credit somebody. But it's not like read this for more information on this sort of situation. Sorry, I feel like I wasn't very helpful, but maybe Pranay can have something to say.
So, I think about 40% of my text goes to my endnotes. And, there are stories. For example, there's a story that I talk about in my book. I think all of us heard this story as children, that, Ganga ka pani kabhi kharab nahi hota, right? The water of Ganga never gets spoiled. So you've never asked that question. Why does that happen, right? So when I asked that question, it took me several years to find that answer. But there's a chemical equation that now putting a chemical equation in the middle of a book will put off so many people, because lots of people hated chemistry. I mean, they might have taken physics, biology, and most of them even who did not take up science have picked up this book, right? Or they are interested in natural history, but they would hate to see an equation in the middle of a chapter. So I've pushed it at the rear. But the whole idea that you want to talk about the power of Ganga's water and you want to explain the science behind it, you have a nifty story. You've got an interesting story, and it. So you need to build that in, because see, remember that this book is a handy reference till the time you wrote it. You want to give the reader every opportunity to explore every fact that you've said. It is accounted for, right? So it is like a fact check that you are presenting, based on which you have written that, right? Or that section or that line, right? Now, the good thing that has happened is that now you have DOI numbers, which are very short. You can also do one thing. I think Ed Yong's book has just, the one that came out is very, very nice. What he's done is he's on his website, he's put all his references in detail. So you can, once you go there, you can see the links, right? And the DOIs or whatever, right? So I think that's another way you can summarize your references, but you can redirect the reader that in case you're interested on more references that I've looked at into this particular section, please go to my website and the links are there, right? I think, the other way to look at it is, especially for newspaper articles and all, I think what you need to do is go to URL shorteners. And again, they become very tiny. They're like about 7 or 8 or 10 characters, right? They're really tiny. So use URL shorteners, use DOI numbers. Now, these are conveniences that we've got with the internet age. But do not put a reference to a claim that you're making, which can be contested. Because somebody will say, listen, this is not right. It has to be read in this way. Because all science is counterfactual. Whether it's biochemistry, whether it's anatomy, whether it's particle physics, there are ways to look at those pieces of papers that contradict and supplement each other's argument. So you have to be very careful about that.
Great. Thank you. Thank you so much, Nandita and Pranay.